Briefly go over the agenda. What we've got is a seasonal outlook, just to provide an update on some of the fire weather and what's going on, and talk about red flag warnings. Fuels profile and fire restriction, to talk about the current trends with fuels throughout the state. Human caused fires, to talk about the percentage of fires that are caused by people, in the addition of the USDA Forest Service's hoot owl restrictions. Fuels and fire in the Lake Tahoe Basin, to talk about condition of fuels up there. A list of new and current fire resources, and what is different about the 2020 fire season. And so to help us with that today, we've got representatives from the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Nevada Division of Forestry, National Weather Service, and the Reno Fire Department. So we'll go ahead and get started with the seasonal outlook. Casey, if you'd like to start.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry. So I'm going to give an outlook for this fire season briefly. We're already seeing a very active fire season with fires that are showing extreme fire behavior for this early in the fire season. We've had 142 fires so far this year, burning just shy of 10,000 acres, 6 of which have been caused by lightning. We had a very dry winter, below normal across most of the state, except for the southern portion, including our high elevation snowpack. So we didn't get a whole lot of moisture to pack down our fuel loads from the previous winter, which was actually a big winter for us. We have had very little precip in the last 30 days with above normal temps in some portions of the state. They've been record-setting temperatures. So that has rapidly dried out primarily our lower elevation fuels, but also is working to dry out our higher elevation forests as well. So we are carrying forward, as I said, not only a heavy fuel load from the winter previous to this one, as well as what moisture we did get in the spring, creating a new grass crop of fine flashy fuels. So we're at about 100 to 300% of our normal fuel loading in the inner spaces. We are seeing drought conditions in much of the state. So all of that put together, if you look on Predictive Services website, they crunch all of the data that they get on fuel moistures and weather and predictions, and it's looking to be an above average fire season for the southern portion of the state in June. Probably the latter part of June, though the southern portion of the state has already been seeing quite a lot of fire activity. The rest of the state will go into above normal conditions likely for most of July, and then it will switch to above normal conditions to the north and northwest parts of the state into August and September. We are looking at a much more active fire season this year than last year. Last year we got really lucky. We burned just over 82,000 acres in the state. So we are all prepared, as you'll hear today, to try to quickly suppress those fires. And with that, I'll pass it to Chris Malcolm at National Weather Service.
Thanks, Casey. Chris Malcolm, I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Reno. I'm essentially our public affairs officer. And just to kind of segue on from what Casey said, the outlook is for an above average fire season across a good chunk of the state. And I think one difference over the previous years is that since our winter precip was so low, is that kind of starts opening up some of those higher terrain and larger vegetation for fires, compared to the previous years where we had tons of moisture up in the mountains, kind of put the kibosh on fire. So I think that's one big difference that we see for this year. So the summer weather outlook, any of you who've heard me present know I'm kind of iffy on looking at the weather months in advance. I just don't think we're quite there yet. But what I do look for, though, in our models is sort of screaming signals. And this year, not really seeing anything on precipitation for this summer. It could go either way. It could have a wet summer, it could have a dry summer. But what I am seeing is a screaming signal for above normal temperatures across a good chunk of Nevada for this summer. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Now, to what extent that above normalness will be, we don't know, but there is a pretty strong signal for above normal temperatures this summer. Now, last year, we did luck out, as mentioned before. we didn't have as many red flag warning days as normal, and we didn't have too many windy days. So yeah, odds are we may go back to something kind of more normal for this year, just kind of roll the dice type of stuff. So our red flag warnings, that's the bread and butter from the National Weather Service that helps our fire partners prepare for those big days. Red flag warnings, we're trying to introduce them more to the public, kind of a, definitely don't do stupid stuff to start a fire on any day, but definitely don't do it on a red flag day. That's kind of the general gist of them. And so red flag warnings, we issue them for wind and low humidity and for dry lightning, thunderstorms with lots of lightning. And the predictability on those is different. I think that's an important thing. Those wind and low humidity days, we can often see 3, 4, 5 days in advance and give a nice notice on those. The thunderstorm, dry lightning days, not as much, maybe more like a day or so, sometimes even, only about 12 hours. So those are a little bit trickier. But when we do issue those allow our partners in the fire services to get ready for days when fires, if they do start, they could grow rapidly and get out of control quite quickly. So anyway, that's our take from the Weather Service looking at a hot summer. It's always hot summer, but there seem to be some signals that could be an above average temperature summer going into this year. So that's what I have.
Thanks, Chris. Now we'll move on to the fuels profile and fire restrictions with Paul Peterson.
All right, thank you, Chris. Paul Peterson, State Fire Management Officer for BLM, Nevada. And so as Chris and Casey said, with the extremely dry winter that we had, did result in low grass growth. However, a lot of that is already cured in most of our elevations. And with a low snowpack, that also didn't compact down our carryover fuel. So we still do have some of those standing fuels from our previous couple years. Our energy release component, which is, it measures the available energy that's in fuels. Right now in Southern Nevada, it's anywhere at an 85 to 90th percentile, and putting those fuels in a critical status. In the Sierra Front and Western Nevada, we're about 65 to 75% in energy release component. And then in Northeast and Northern and Eastern Nevada, we're in 55 to 85%, which we're probably about 3 to 4 weeks ahead of where we usually see for the past couple of years. And while those percentiles are high, we don't need a 90th percentile to see large fires. We typically see that beforehand. And so what that has resulted is those fire behavior. On May 10th, we had the Taft fire that happened just outside of Ely, between Ely and Lehman Capes, and 1,118 acres all in one burn period. This last weekend, we had some lightning fires over in Elko area, Hogan fire just south of Wells, Nevada. That was 502 acres. And then the Ivapaw fire, which is south of Wendover on the Utah state line, that was 7,000 acres. And that run happened in about 8 hours. And so with the conditions that we're seeing, we decided to go into fire restrictions as a state. This is the first time Nevada has gone into restrictions as a state with the federal and state agencies. And each agency has their own policies and laws that they have to tier to those restrictions. So there's a little bit, there's some differences, but we made them all common so that language can be the same for ease of public communication. So the restrictions are building and maintaining a campfire, charcoal barbecue, or stove and fire with outside of existing campgrounds, picnic areas, or improved campsites. That fire must be attended at all times, extinguished, and be clear of 6 feet of burnable vegetation. Any smoking on public lands, as well as welding with a acetylene torch with open flames, using any explosive to include exploding targets, and then discharge use of fireworks, tracer rounds, exploding targets, or any incendiary device. So those are always illegal within Nevada, especially fireworks. And we just encourage the public to recreate responsibly when they're out on public lands. Chris, back to you.
All right, thanks, Paul. Now we're going to talk about human-caused fires with the U.S. Forest Service.
Yeah, thanks again, Paul. This is Gwen Sanchez, and I am the Fire Management Officer for the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest. And Paul had a great segue into really what can the public do to help us. So looking at about a 10-year average, approximately 37% of the fires that we respond to on the Humboldt-Toyabe are human-caused fires. And so you look at even last year, that number was higher at 41%. That's a significant part of what we do and what we respond to during the summer. And so a way that the publics can help us is to do their part to prevent those human-caused incidents. That would decrease the amount of incidents that we would need to respond to and really help keep our firefighters safe and protected as we go forward through the summer. In addition, those firefighters would then be available to be able to respond to lightning or natural caused incidents. So again, 40%, approximately 40% of our fires are human caused fires, which is significant impact and workload on all of our agencies across Nevada and parts of California. And so we're really hoping that the publics can help do their part in reducing those numbers so that we can save the firefighters to respond to those naturally ignited fires. The other aspect that I want to share with you all that is a little bit different and new to the Forest Service across many parts of Nevada are we will be implementing firewood cutting requirements, also known as hoot owl restrictions, on the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest lands across the state of Nevada and parts of California. What these restrictions include is we have what's known as a 1 p.m. rule, which says after 1 p.m. during a red flag warning, please no more wood cutting. We want you to have all of your activities wrapped up and completed by 1 p.m. as far as cutting wood, so that we can really reduce, again, just the potential of lighting or starting a fire as a result of human activities. The other part of that is the 1 p.m. rule if we are in any sort of restriction. So because we're going into fire restrictions currently, that 1 p.m. rule will stand in place. So during the time that the Humboldt-Toyabe is under fire restrictions, we are asking that you cease all of your cutting, firewood cutting by 1 p.m. Thanks, Chris.
All right, thank you, Gwen. Now we're going to move on to talk about fuels and fire in the Lake Tahoe Basin. And again, that's with the U.S. Forest Service.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon from the Lake Tahoe Basin. My name is Carrie Thaler, the Forest Fire Management Officer for the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. Lake Tahoe Basin is currently in a moderate drought. That, combined with the current and predicted dry fuel conditions, will mean that the Lake Tahoe Basin will be in a watch-out situation in relation to significant fire potential, especially in July and August. And fire season has already started here as well. Unlike the Nevada desert, a large fire here in the Lake Tahoe Basin is considered to be any fire over 10 acres. Timber is the driving fuel in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and right now the timber is very dry, including at the higher elevations. Similar to everyone else, the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit Forest Service has enhanced fire restrictions in place effective May 30th. The restrictions are very similar to those in Nevada. For the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, campfires are only allowed in hosted, developed recreation sites and campgrounds in metal fire rings. The actual fire restriction order can be found both on the LTBMU Forest Service homepage, fs.usda.gov/LTBMU, and on nevadafireinfo.org. In California, 90% of all wildfires are human caused. In the Lake Tahoe Basin, the #1 cause of those fires is illegal abandoned campfires. As Chief Sanchez mentioned, we ask the public to please help us. Only have campfires in the authorized locations. Thoroughly douse your campfires with water before going to bed or going out on a hike. Make sure your fires are completely within the metal fire rings. If you come upon an abandoned campfire that is still burning or see smoke in the forest, please call 911 immediately. Another thing that you should be thinking about is preparing or hardening your home. making sure that you have defensible space around your home, and making sure that you have an evacuation plan for if and when there is a fire in your community. For the Lake Tahoe area, you can go to tahoelivingwithfire.com for information on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Now we're going to move on and talk about new and current fire resources with Casey.
Thank you again, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry. So this year you're going to hear with our next speaker, Dave, how closely we all prepared together, state, federal, local jurisdictions, as we do every year. But this year, a little bit more than ever because of the COVID-19 restrictions and our due diligence to get our fire staff on, keep them working and have them ready and available when fires start. So all agencies have hired all of our seasonal firefighters, Forest Service, BLM, local government, state, NDF. We've all hired our seasonals. All of our existing staff are here. We have all of our engines at the Division of Forestry, and all of our offices are staffed with our fire staff. We're trying to keep them distant, and we do have distancing measures in place, but they are available for immediate response, as are our 3 helicopters down at the Minden hangar. In addition, this year, because of the fires predicted above normal fire season and because of the COVID-19 restrictions, we also were able to get some additional assets. The BLM was able to hire 21 additional firefighters this year. The Humboldt-Toyabe of the U.S. Forest Service was able to convert around 18 seasonal firefighters to permanent to more closely match the fire seasons we're seeing now. They're fire years, not fire seasons. In addition, and as well as additional seasonals. They also were able to get 2 additional contract helicopters, a Type 1 and a Type 2, based out of Minden. The Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit was able to get an additional Type 1 helicopter based in South Lake Tahoe as an additional asset. All of these assets are additional to the air assets and the firefighting assets that we had in place in years previous. In addition to that, we have 39 fire cameras around the state. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the Alert Tahoe and the Alert Nevada wildfire cameras. We will be adding 14 new cameras this year, 6 the BLM purchased, and 8 will be coming online from NV Energy. And possibly some additional funds to put in more of those assets for early detection and to detect what is going to be needed from a suppression resource as well. So that's what we have in addition, and that's all I have.
Thanks, Casey. Now we'll move on to what is different about the 2020 fire season and hear from Reno Fire Department and the Nevada Fire Chiefs Association President.
All right, thank you, Chris. My name is Dave Cochran. I am the chief of the Reno Fire Department. I'm also the president of the Nevada Fire Chiefs Association, which represents all the local jurisdictions throughout the state of Nevada. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit is just how our responses look different this year. This will be virtually or pretty much invisible to the public eye, but it's what we're doing to maintain the health and welfare of our firefighting force. And I'll break it down kind of into 4 areas. And one is prior to departure. So, and as by way of background, I'm going to use my department as an example, but I met with all the chiefs in Northern Nevada this morning, most of them anyway. And by and large, this is the practice that everybody's following. When our firefighters show up to work, they screen every day for fever and flu-like symptoms before they begin their shift. We're going to do the exact same thing before they are deployed to a fire. So the idea, catch anybody who may be sick or ill before we send them to a fire. Make sure that they bring all their proper personal protective equipment to each fire. We're going to be operating in what the term we're calling this year as a module of 1. And that is whatever group you're assigned to, whether it's an engine company of 4 people, maybe a hand crew of more than that, or maybe a single resource, you're going to identify yourself as a module and try to stay within that module. The idea there is to isolate any potential exposure or infection to that module so that the entire firefighting force is not affected. We're going to take all our sanitizing equipment, hand sanitizer, those type of things with us so that we're ready wherever we are, if those resources are not available on the fire or wherever we're assigned. The other thing we're going to do, I mentioned the PPE, is be ready to respond to calls as if we were that local jurisdiction. That means masks, gloves, gowns, because that's a potential assignment on a wildfire. You may be backfilling for the local jurisdiction and responding to their calls. The next area that I'll talk about is travel, going to and from the fire. We're going to try and, again, social distance like everybody is doing. We're not going to dine in if we have to eat along the way. We're going to send we're going to order food, send one person in to get it, and then bring that back out to the engine. We're going to avoid congregating with crowds. And as we get to whether it be a restaurant or our assigned fire, we're going to try and minimize the number of interactions we have with groups. And that means sending one person into the restaurant, into camp, into meetings, that type of thing. While we're at camp, there may be restrictions, and we expect there to be restrictions on travel to and from camp. No trips into town, no trips from town or from locals into the fire camp. Again, the idea there is to quarantine that module of one concept, make sure we limit the number of exposures, again, to maintain that firefighting force. And then on an operational basis, the things we need to take care of are the fire. The fire doesn't really care if there's a pandemic, but we're going to have to do our job. But if we can minimize the risk to us and the others assigned to that fire through this module of one concept, that's what we're going to do. So thank you, and I'll send it back to Chris.